Hello guys, today we are going to discuss the topic called as menstrual cycle. Before this, we must know that any individual, whether it is male or whether it is female, during the process of development, they acquire some of the changes and that are remarkable. Like when a baby male become adult, ठीक है, that is called as puberty, ठीक है. तो जब वो जवान होता है, that he becomes youth, there are different sexual characters which you notice, different changes which you notice in his body structure, like development of beard, development, change in the voice, okay, body posture that also changes. In the similar way, there are various changes that are associated with the male, and one of the predominant change which is noticed in case of the female is the start of the menses or the menstrual cycle. Normally in the age of 13th onwards, 13th is the age where a female is getting one particular uh, cycle in the month that is repeated, but we call it as a MC cycle or the menstrual cycle, or we generally call it as a period. Okay, so have a look at it, what happens exactly and what are the changes that are associated with this particular cycle in case of the female. So when it comes to the menstrual cycle, yes, the cycle has the name called as menstrual, and the menses are there that are released during this particular period. So when there is one particular thing that happens in the from the vagina or the from the female reproductive tract, there is the red color bleeding that occurs. Okay, so the blood comes out and there are various debris that are there, and this lasts for 5 days. So what are the changes that are associated with that we are going to look in this particular video. So what happens, you know that the female reproductive system consists of ovary and the fallopian tube, and the relative uterus is there, and there is a process of what we called it as a ovarian development or the egg development that start. Ovary is the organ which is responsible for the development of the eggs. Okay, so once the development of egg is taking place, so egg, once it is there in the oocyte, once there is when this egg is there inside this ovary, there is development of what we called it as this blue color structure that is around the egg that happens, that is known as the follicle of the egg, and that follicle is now growing the egg accordingly, and it is protecting the egg. Okay, it is protecting the egg. So with the development of this particular egg which is there, it secretes one of the hormone which is known as follicle stimulating hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone, it helps in the development of this egg which is called as a now ovarian follicle. Ovarian follicle मतलब ओवरी के अंदर में रहा हुआ एक और उसके अराउंड डेवलप हुआ फॉलिकल, उसका डेवलपमेंट होता है, दैट इज अंडर द कंट्रोल ऑफ द एफएसएच, दैट इज द फॉलिकल स्टिमुलेटिंग हार्मोन. दिस इज फर्स्ट हार्मोन which is responsible for the relative changes or the development of the ovary. Okay, what effect it brings about, that we will see. But first of all, follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone, these two hormones are released from the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland कहाँ पर होती है? Pituitary gland is situated in the brain, below the brain, in the brain, and inside the like in the down part of the brain. Like this is the structure. This if I talk about brain, तो ये बीच में यहाँ पे होगा, somewhere around this. So here, if you can look at the position, this is the this portion is known as hypothalamus, and it is situated over here. So this is the structure of the pituitary gland, and it secretes the follicle stimulating hormone, that is FSH and the LH. LH का फंक्शन बाद में देखेंगे, पहले FSH is responsible for the development of the ovarian follicle. Now this ovarian follicle is developing. It continue in the state of developing. Meanwhile, during development, with this development, there is secretion of another hormone which is called as estrogen. Okay, so this is another hormone that is secreted. Estrogen का function क्या होता है? Estrogen is known as a female sex hormone, and what it brings about the various changes in the female, various changes in the secondary sexual character, like development of breast, change in the voice. ठीक है, female का voice पतला हो जाता है. So these are the different changes that are associated with the estrogen that we can see. We will see what are the relative changes that are associated with the menstrual cycle over here, and then there is another hormone that is released. What happens to this particular ovary? when it reaches to the one particular stage that is known as mature ovary, now this follicle is have grown up, there is release of this particular ovary, release of this particular egg, or what we called it as a ova, from that follicle that occurs. And for this release of this particular ova, there is one hormone that is required. That hormone is nothing but known as the luteinizing hormone, or the LH. LH helps or plays the important role in the process is called as ovulation. Matlab, the breakage of follicle and the release of the ova outside the follicle is known as ovulation. What happens? This follicle which is there, that undergoes a sort of development now, and this leads to the formation of what we call it as a corpus luteum. And corpus luteum again secrete one of the hormone called as progesterone. Okay, try to understand the names of this hormone: follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, estrogen, and the progesterone. So progesterone, it is again very important hormone which is required for the relative phase in the menstrual cycle that we will shortly discuss. And there is another hormone which is called as estrogen. So corpus luteum secretes progesterone and estrogen. What happens to the corpus luteum? Once corpus luteum is there, it is degenerated, it becomes inactive, and it forms the corpus albicans. ठीक है, तो नाम ध्यान रखना है, corpus luteum and corpus albicans. Now we will see what happens during menstrual cycle. Okay, so as you know that this development of the ovary takes place over here, and here this development of this follicle and this particular changes that are occurring in the ovary. And you must have noticed this in the female reproductive video, that this ovary is there and it is fertilized with the help of sperm, which is come across the female reproductive system with the help of the with the help of ejaculation, or the after process of ejaculation, there are lot many semen that is released over there, and the sperm that goes and fertilize this particular ovary. Okay, what happens if it is not fertilized? If it is not fertilized, every ovum, when it is there inside the female, it is released every month, and because of which there occurs a cycle called as menstrual cycle. So the bleeding which is taking place along with this particular ova and the relative endometrium, or the relative say debris of the uterus, it is called it as a menses. Okay, so we are going to look at what are the changes that are taking place in the uterus, and what are the relative developmental changes in the ovary brings about the changes in the uterus. ठीक है, तो आपको पहले बात ध्यान रखना है कि this is a portion that is changing in the ovary. This occurs in the female reproductive system, and these are the changes that are occurring in the uterus. ठीक है, डायग्राम समझने के पहले, this is the change in the uterus. This uterus, this uterine wall that is changing. Okay, so this change is there here in the uterine wall, and this change which I am talking about initially, this here. So these changes that are taking place in the ovary. Okay, so when I talk about the first phase, like today there is menses. Menses last for, like today is the start or the beginning or the first day of the menstrual cycle. So menses जब शुरुआत होते हैं तो it longs for 5 days. Okay, so this process is under control of the 4 important hormones that are called as the follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, progesterone, and estrogen. What we will see is, as soon as you know that ovary is undergoing the process of development, this developmental process of the ovary secretes estrogen. Okay, and what happens? What happens the moment this estrogen is secreted? This after 5 days, the period of regeneration of the endometrium starts. ठीक है, menstrual cycle gets over by the 5th day. ठीक है, what happens? 5th day पे menstrual cycle end हो जा रही है, और menses की शुरुआत फिर से होने वाली है. आफ्टर एवरी 28 days or the 30 days, this cycle will repeat. Okay, so we are going to change what are the relative changes that are occurring in the uterus. Now this estrogen is released. This estrogen is responsible for the development of the uterus. When there is bleeding, there is that uterine wall, this wall get disturbed, और ये breakup हो जाने के बाद there are various changes that are taking place. ये कुछ तो भी ऐसे degenerate हो जाती है. ठीक है, and what happens? This degenerative wall need to be regenerate again. इसको वैसे normalized state में लाना जरूरी होता है. So the first change which we can notice is because of the hormone called as estrogen. Estrogen is responsible for the regeneration of the endometrium. till that moment where endometrium is regenerating, there is continuous development of the ovary that takes place in the ovarian follicle. ठीक है, तो ये ovarian follicle में ये जो ovarian follicle बन चुका है, इसमें development होते रहता है ovary का, and it is under the control of the follicle stimulating hormone, because this follicle stimulating hormone is continuously developing this particular ovary inside the ओवेरियन फॉलिकल. ठीक है, ओवरी के अंदर में ओवेरियन फॉलिकल का डेवलपमेंट ऐसे होते चल रहा है. एंड नाउ देयर इज वन पीरियड व्हाट वी कॉल्ड इट एज अ ओव्यूलेशन, एंड दिस ओव्यूलेशन लीड्स टू द व्हाट, देयर इज दिस ओव्यूलेशन इज अंडर द कंट्रोल ऑफ द ल्यूटिनाइजिंग हार्मोन. नाउ व्हाट हैपेंस ऑन द 14th डे ऑफ द आफ्टर द मेंसेस दैट टेकन प्लेस, मतलब मेंसेस होने के बाद, वो ब्लीडिंग होने के बाद में 14वें दिन पे क्या होगा, दिस प्रोसेस ऑफ रीजनरेशन ऑफ एंडोमेट्रियम इज कंटिन्यूइंग एंड द प्रोसेस ऑफ डेवलपमेंट ऑफ द फॉलिकल इज कंटिन्यूइंग, एंड व्हाट हैपेंस, देयर इज रिलीज ऑफ द ओवा नाउ फ्रॉम द follicle that takes place, and this process is known as the ovulation. अब ovary release हो गई, and that ovary is coming out of this through this fallopian tube to this particular uterus. Okay, so this process of the release of the ova from the fallopian tube, or from the follicle, from the ovarian follicle, is known as what? It is known as the ovulation. The process of ovulation gets over by the 14th day. Okay, what happens after this? The 14th day, now the ovary is released. Now it is about or ready for a sperm to fertilize. अब copulation नहीं होता है, और the process of mating is not taking place, and there is no sperm that is entering into the female. ठीक है, तो जब female reproductive tract में कोई sperm enter ही नहीं हो रहा है, what would happen? It continues in the process of, वो वैसे का वैसा ही रहेगा. Okay, what are the relative changes that are taking place? This corpus, this follicle then develop into the corpus luteum, or corpus luteum that brings about the secretion of hormone called as a progesterone. It again brings about the relative development of the endometrium. What is responsible during this period? What happens? This endometrium or the uterus here, it starts to grow up in such a way that it brings about the various secretions into it, whereby there is, if somehow sperm is able to fertilize that particular ova. ओके, ये जो एग है या जो ओवा है, अगर इसको बाय चांस स्पर्म फर्टिलाइज करता है, इट इज नाउ एबल टू फॉर्म अ बेबी, एंड नाउ इट इज डेवलपिंग इनटू द एम्ब्रियो, एंड देयरफॉर दिस यूटेरस इज टू बी रेडी फॉर द डेवलपमेंट ऑफ द एम्ब्रियो, एंड देयरफॉर दिस progesterone is helping to make the wall ready for the implantation of the embryo. So the function of the progesterone is to make the uterine wall, is to regenerate uterine wall by the help of the by stimulating the various secretions of the glands in the of the uterus. Okay, तो यूटेरस के डेवलपमेंट, यूटेरस के डिफरेंट ग्लैंड्स जो है उसको एक्साइट करके, उसको रेगुलेट करके, ये एंडोमेट्रियम जो होता है यूटेरस का, उसका डेवलपमेंट कंट्रोल करता है. दैट इज द फंक्शन ऑफ प्रोजेस्टेरॉन. फंक्शन ऑफ ल्यूटिनाइजिंग हार्मोन, इट ब्रिंग्स अबाउट द प्रोसेस ऑफ ओव्यूलेशन. इट ब्रेक्स द फॉलिकल हार्मोन एंड रिलीज द ओवरी. फंक्शन ऑफ एस्ट्रोजन, it is helpful for the period of the or the proper regeneration of the uterine endometrium. Okay, so this is the function. Now what happens if this ovary is not at all fertilized? Okay, after some time what happens, this corpus luteum that degenerate, and it forms the corpus luteum that leads to the formation of what we call as a corpus albicans. Now we can see this deformed structure. Okay, so this deformed structure is there. After this structure is formed, corpus albicans, there is continuous degeneration of this particular uterine wall takes place. How it is taking place? It is take place because ki progesterone and estrogen secretion that level down. The moment this corpus albicans forms, ovulation प्रोसेस के बाद में जब कॉर्पस ल्यूटियम फॉर्म हुआ, कॉर्पस ल्यूटियम फॉर्म होने के बाद में जब ये कॉर्पस ल्यूटियम इज नाउ अंडरगोइंग, इफ the ovary is not being able to fertilize within 24 hours, मतलब अगर जब ओवरी रिलीज हो गई और वो 24 घंटे के अंदर, if it is not being fertilized in the 24 hours, okay, so what would happen? It would undergo the process what we called it as a degeneration. Corpus luteum undergoes the degeneration and it forms the corpus albicans, and corpus albicans level down the secretion of प्रोजेस्टेरॉन एंड एस्ट्रोजन. प्रोजेस्टेरॉन और एस्ट्रोजन का सिक्रेशन एकदम कम कर देता है, एंड बिकॉज ऑफ विच व्हाट हैपेंस, देयर इज कंटिन्यूअसली देयर इज degeneration of this particular wall that starts. Okay, so what happens after 28 days, there is degeneration of this particular wall start, and now this again there is a bleeding that takes place. Along with this bleeding, this there is endometrium, यहाँ के जो tissues रहते हैं वो, plus the ova which is not being fertilized. ठीक है, ये ova वो menses के साथ में बह जाता है. तो this lasts for 5 days. यहाँ you can see the different changes that are associated in the ovary. देखो ovarian wall disturb हुआ है करके zigzag line से दिखाया हुआ है, और this continues till the fifth day. ठीक है, तो fifth day is the last day where now this process of bleeding that ends and the regeneration of the uterine wall starts. Okay, so this is how this 4 hormones they affect. What happens if the ovary, if this ovary is fertilized? अगर ovary fertilized हो जाती है, there are no menses that occur. मतलब if somehow sperm is able to fertilize this particular ovary or able to have combination that exists with this ovary, तो इससे zygote बनेगा, and zygote बनेगा that leads to the formation of embryo. So therefore there is no menstrual cycle that takes place. Okay, and how long it will not take place? कितने दिन तक के नहीं होगी menstrual cycle? जब तक के पूरा बेबी डेवलप नहीं होगा. And the moment baby takes the birth, that is the process called as parturition, and after parturition there is what we call it as a milk feeding. ठीक है, तो माँ जो होती है अपने बच्चों को दूध पिलाती है. Till that moment you will not be getting this particular menses. The moment that process get over, the milk feeding starts, then the menses they regulate again. ठीक है, फिर से उसमें menses जो होते हैं वो regular आना शुरू हो जाते हैं. What important characteristic you should notice is the period will takes place in every woman till the age of 45 years. Automatically after the age of 45 years, this period they stops. This is known as, this process of stoppage of the menses is known as what? It is known as menopause. So that occurs in the female after the age of 45. 45 age के बाद में menses बंद हो जाते हैं. ठीक है, and the second most important thing is that this takes place every month in the female, and that is the characteristic, one of the characteristic that the baby girl is now grown up as an adult. ठीक है, वो young हो चुकी है, and that is one of the characteristic. ठीक है, so this is how it is the menstrual cycle. What you have to notice is there are the 4 important hormones: follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, estrogen and progesterone. They work together to run this process and to have this menses properly grown. Okay, so this is the 14th day, which is called as ovulation, for which luteinizing hormone is required. There is development of the endometrium or the regeneration of endometrium. For this estrogen is required. For the development of the ovarian follicle, follicle stimulating hormone is required, and the progesterone is required for the relative development of the endometrium of the uterus, so that there will be implantation of the embryo that takes place. So that's it from the menstrual cycle. What are the relative changes? What you should notice is during this process of the menses, there is lot many pain that a woman or a girl she feels. Okay, especially on the first day till third day. And there are lot many hygiene that is to be maintained for this. Okay, so बहुत सारी ऐसे होते हैं कि जो hygiene maintain करना जरूरी रहता है, otherwise there would be some diseases that may take place. So from that point of view, you should take care and you should develop sanitizing habit accordingly. So that is from this particular topic. Hope you followed, and once you finish watching the video, take down the notes, the same diagram which you have to which you are looking at the board, you have to draw in your notebook. Thank you. Hope you follow.